Can everybody, is everybody able to see my screen and hear me? I'm gonna kind of minimize this a little bit so that I can see if people are raising their hand or if there's people in the chat room who want to ask a question. I'd be more than happy to help you with that. So today we're presenting on working with the Surrogacy Agency 101. We've presented this at various conferences around the country before, and it just serves as a basic kind of introduction to how you can locate an agency, how to work with an agency to find your gestational carrier, and all of the kind of elements that you need to know throughout the process in order to foster an effective surrogacy journey. You may have been going through IVF or struggling with infertility and are thinking of alternate ways to build your family. And in that case, there's many options. There's adoption, of course, there's surrogacy, there's, other ways of, of IVF and IUI, if that's still working for you. So there's a whole bunch of different options out there. And this is what we're just talking about today, is working through an agency to find a surrogate to carry a gestational carrier to carry your child for you. So some of the roles that agencies play, our main role is to recruit and interview and screen gestational carriers. We do background checks with them and give them psychological evaluations so that they have to pass a pretty rigorous set of circumstances to be able to move forward as a gestational carrier, so that you can be sure that you are being matched with a healthy person, a healthy candidate who has gone through the application process, who has gotten a psychological evaluation, and who has worked with us for probably it's about a period of a few months to be able to get to the place that she is. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Basically, what the agency does is acts as your liaison. Between you, your carrier, your clinic, and your attorney, and some other professionals as well. We keep the tracks going, the trains running on time, and we make sure to coordinate all of those different silos, I guess you could say, so that you can have a more seamless experience, and you can basically focus on other things, on building your family, so that you're not constantly having to go back and forth, like locate your own surrogate, go through all the medical processes with her. And you can also rely on your agency to refer you to attorneys who are experienced in surrogacy law and who can help you with the very, very complicated issue of surrogacy insurance, which a lot of people always have a lot of questions about. So basically what we're there is to do is, be your advocate, and we are there to help you with anything that you need before, during, and after your journey. So those are the main roles that the agency plays. Yes, I can make the screen larger. There you go. The number one way to find agencies would be to just do your research. Go online, ask people that you may know who have used an agency for finding their carrier. You can usually ask for free consultations. Many agencies will give them and will answer the basic questions about their agency that you will need to know. Some of them have request functions or screen applications online that you can take advantage of, and just enter your information and they'll get back to you. You can also think about, do some more research to decide if you want an agency that's close in proximity to you and or your GC. Some larger agencies, they operate all over the country. They recruit GCs from all over the country. And just so you know, I realized I got ahead of myself. GC stands for gestational carrier. And that's the kind of surrogacy that agencies work with for the most part, since traditional surrogacy, which is where the carrier uses her own gametes or her own eggs, is not legal in all states and is often not practiced by or not worked with various agencies. Some of them offer Skype or FaceTime consultations. That's always a good way, obviously during COVID, to work on that. And I think that the best way, I mean, a lot of times the way people find us is just by talking to people in their community. They talk to their reproductive endocrinologists who could refer them to an agency. They will talk to friends or family who've gone through it, or maybe a coworker who has gone through the process. And, they may be able to answer some specific questions about that. So I had heard in an earlier presentation about, interview more than one agency. That's a great idea. Sometimes what people do is pick a couple different sizes and locations to see kind of what fits what their ideal situation would be when they want to work with a surrogacy agency. So basically, to get started, it's not daunting. There's an initial consultation. Oftentimes those are free. There's an application process. Usually it's, sometimes they have them online, sometimes they're just written out. Usually there's an application fee, not always, and then some other form of information that they would like, such as a personalized letter to your potential gestational carrier, pictures of you and your family, and your story. Basically, your story as to how you got into surrogacy. GCs really love those personal stories that they can connect with. We will also perform a background check, not just on our carriers, but on our intended parents, because this really helps a lot in the matching process. Intended parents also go through an interview with us. They're usually, or with the agency that they choose. They're usually an hour or two long. We get to know you a little bit better, go over processes and protocols. And then it's ASMRM recommendations or requirements, that you have a psychological evaluation, just like the gestational carrier. It should not, these days, again, most of them are being done via Zoom or Skype or FaceTime. And so it's therefore a little bit easier to schedule them. And the agency you're working with should be able to refer you to somebody unless you've already done a psychological evaluation with your clinic. So that's how that process works. Once you get through the application process and the agency that you're working with tells you that you are therefore ready to match, you wait. You're ready to be matched. You wait for the agency to find a great match for you. One of the most frequent questions we get is, how long does it take? And it can take anywhere from, honestly, sometimes the stars align and it can be immediately. Sometimes it can be between 6 and 12 months. And it just really depends on a whole bunch of different factors. And, I'd be happy to take questions on that at the end if anybody has any, but there's just very, very many things that weigh into what makes the wait the length that it is. What usually happens is the agency will send the intended parents the profile of the carrier, and the intended parents will look over that profile and review it. And if they have any remaining questions that may not be addressed in the profile, we'll get back to the agency and ask them maybe to clear them up with the carrier, and maybe, send them back and forth, get a little more information. So then once the intended parents like their profile, they will usually, in most cases, send a profile of the intended parents back to the GC, and if she's married, with her husband or partner. And she will review that, and they will do the same. Once everyone accepts, then usually the next step is setting up the match meeting. So usually, and these are done a variety of ways. Obviously, before COVID, they were in person. If you're in a different state from your gestational carrier, the intended parents are often encouraged to come in person, since it's just a lot easier to get to know somebody face to face. Although, of course, Zoom has been a very, very useful tool during the last year. And a lot of, if not most, or if not all, match meetings for the most part are done that way. It is also advantageous because it's easier for people to schedule via Zoom when they're sitting in their own homes and they don't have to plan a trip or whatnot. But I would expect that to get back to normal at some point, where face-to-face meetings will be encouraged so that you can begin to foster that connection. The next portion is medical clearance, and I'm going to have Julie, who's our client coordinator. She's also an RN who has worked for fertility clinics here in the Twin Cities, talk about this process.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Claire. So what happens after the match and everyone decides that they are a good fit, they'll work together, they're ready to move ahead. Part of our screening process for the gestational carriers that Claire had mentioned earlier is that I review all of their medical records. So typically at any agency, there's someone reviewing all of their medical records and looking through their background, their full application to make sure that they don't have any big red flags, anything that would automatically rule them out health-wise, psychologically, et cetera, from being able to be a fit gestational carrier. So once you've signed your contracts with your agency, the match has been complete, then all of the medical records, if there's an OB form that the GC has been approved by her OB, her personal contact information, all of that gets sent over with a third-party coordinator at the clinic where the intended parents are working with. And then usually that reproductive endocrinologist is going to do their initial kind of pre-assessment of that gestational carrier and do all of the paper review. And if they have any questions, they can do a back and forth with the agency, which is where it's really helpful to have an agency in that situation versus managing it yourself, is because you have people who are experts in this and also have an established relationship with the clinic themselves. So we're able to help as agencies coordinate that. And then once the reproductive endocrinologist says, everything on paper looks great, let's go ahead and get that medical clearance appointment scheduled. So the gestational carrier and sometimes her partner will go to, it's about, 3 to 4 hour appointment in total. Of course, with the pandemic, some things have been done virtually also, but typically what she needs to have done is some blood tests, infectious disease screening. She'll have a little bit of a history and physical taken with the reproductive endocrinologist. And then the biggest thing too is they'll do some type of a salient sonogram at that appointment. They want to really get a good look inside of her uterus to make sure that there's nothing there that would cause any concern or questions for proper implantation happening. And if there is something that occurs, then they deal with that bump in the road there and see if it's something that can be remedied and still move forward, or if it's something where the gestational carrier, we can't move past this issue for whatever reason. They sometimes will do injection training for her medication protocol at that appointment. And the only thing that the significant other of the gestational carrier needs to do is the infectious disease lab testing. So oftentimes that can just be done at a local clinic. So they don't necessarily need to be there and take the time off work additionally to be there with the GC. The GC can just go on her own. And then after that, Claire, I'll have you move on to the legal phase. Once they've achieved their official medical clearance from the clinic, then that's when legal can really start. Usually you don't want to start legal beyond the fact of doing a meet and greet essentially with who your attorney is and let them know that you're going to be working together. You really don't want to have them start, and they don't really want to start a whole lot of work on getting the actual parentage agreement completed until that official medical clearance has been given. That's like your big cutting of the red ribbon, so to speak, of everyone's good to go, let's move ahead and go forward. So you'll be referred to separate attorneys. The IPs will have their own attorney and the gestational carrier has her own attorney. They're working together for the same common goal, and that's just to create this legal document that's usually, we refer to it oftentimes as a parentage agreement. And that just covers everyone's bases as far as how payment is going to be made with the gestational carrier, reimbursements, coverage for insurance, medical appointments. It goes over pretty relentlessly the fact that the baby belongs to the intended parents and all the expectations that the gestational carrier will follow to safely carry a pregnancy for you. They negotiate these drafts back and forth. Usually, one of them initiates, oftentimes the intended parent's attorney initiates that, sends it over to the gestational carrier. So the carrier is meeting with her attorney to review, send it back to the intended parents. And that goes on until everything is resolved. Usually it's not that long that it takes to do this. These are attorneys who are familiar with surrogacy law, and they work on this in detail. You don't want to go see a personal injury attorney. You don't want to see anyone who's practicing just as an attorney at large. You really do want to see someone who specializes in surrogacy. Everyone signs the final agreement once that's all done. And then once that's complete, then really you're able to move on into the next stage. That gets sent over to the clinic, and then they're able to date the cycle. And the meetings, it's not formal meetings that you have with the attorney where you necessarily have to go to their office and meet in person. A lot of times these are phone meetings or virtual via Zoom or another platform. So then once they've been cleared to go and they've received that, that legal documentation, then the carrier is dated for her embryo transfer cycle. So they give you a calendar. As an agency, we ourselves, I request as the coordinator to have a copy of that calendar too, so we can help make sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and also be another form of support for the carrier if she has any questions. She will take medications to help trick her body basically into thinking it's going to get pregnant on its own by taking estrogen and progesterone. And she'll also need to do some ultrasound monitoring and some lab draws during that time. Usually it's the baseline to make sure that there's nothing eventful happening in her body. She'll take medications, she'll come back for a follow-up. Sometimes there's one more follow-up depending on the results of that first one, but usually it's just that one that's needed a couple weeks after taking the hormones. And if everything looks good and her lining or her uterus is thick enough, then they proceed to transfer about a week later. So at that point, everyone's encouraged to attend. I know COVID kind of did some funny things with us as far as limitations and guidelines that clinics have had, but they really want to include everyone because this is the intended parent's baby. The gestational carrier wants to have them there. They really want them to be integrated into being a full participant in this process along with the gestational carrier. Each clinic has a different protocol post-transfer that they'll tell the GC to abide by, to go over. It's usually just rest really is the biggest thing. And then they'll go over, some other details as far as continuing her medication and then when to come in for the pregnancy test. That's a blood draw. She doesn't do a urine test for that. And usually, each clinic's a little bit different with their timing, but roughly it's about 10 days. Some will go as early as 7, some go as late as 2 weeks. So 10 is about the most common. Once that first pregnancy test is positive, she'll repeat it a couple days later. If everything looks good, then the final step there with the clinic is the confirmation of pregnancy ultrasound, which is a really big, exciting appointment for everyone. That's where you get to see the baby for the first time in utero. You're looking for the positive fetal heart tone, making sure that the embryo implanted appropriately in the uterus and that there's no issues going on there. So then once she is pregnant after that appointment, they'll give her instructions from the clinic as far as medication routine, what she needs to continue taking, because the pregnancy is reliant on these hormones until the placenta starts making enough on their own. And she will then start just regular routine prenatal care. There's not anything that should be handled different with a gestational carrier pregnancy, other than, we tell our carriers and our intended parents, there's just usually a little more excitement from the OB clinic on this, or the midwife or family physician, whoever is managing the pregnancy, because there's not, gestational carrier pregnancies don't happen every single day in clinics, and they know the hard work that it took to achieve this pregnancy and the added excitement that there is there. And so they really just take a little extra TLC, but otherwise it's managed just like any other pregnancy. The GC and the IPs communicate as far as what their plan is for how they want to touch base with appointments. Some intended parents go to every single appointment if they're physically able to, based off of location and their scheduling needs. And sometimes it's text conversations, emails, phone calls, FaceTiming during the appointment. There's a wide variety of ways that you can be involved as intended parents, and that is something that you'll talk to your GC about that also can be addressed partly starting at the match meeting, and then organically your relationship will develop and you'll kind of fall into what your usual rhythm and routine is. The big appointments like that confirmation of pregnancy ultrasound that I talked about, and then that 20-week 20-week, anatomy scan, usually the intended parents really want to move, whatever they can to be able to be at those appointments because they're more interesting, they're more exciting. You get to actually see the baby on the screen. And absolutely, there's everything in between there where intended parents sometimes can make one appointment here and there, or they're not able to make any based off of where they live. And that's all okay. That's all, you just keep that open communication with your gestational carrier so that everyone knows what to expect.
Yep. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you can go ahead and take this.
All right. So now you're probably wondering, by the point that it gets close to delivery, what happens, right before the birth and right afterwards legally. And many states have what are called pre-birth orders, where, your attorneys will be able to work and file the paperwork in order to establish the parentage before birth. Not all states have that. Where our surrogates come from in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Wisconsin has fantastic laws and basically allow most judges, if not all, or most jurisdictions there, allow pre-birth orders. In Minnesota, where most of our populous counties do as well. And so they will take care of that with you at some way midway through pregnancy. And they will also take care of assisting you with, after the baby is born, with the post-birth hearing if one is required in the state that the gestational carrier is in. And just as a reminder, the laws apply to the state where the gestational carrier lives. So not where you as the IPs would live, but where she resides. So around the birth, it's obviously a very exciting time. During COVID, it's been a little dicey about, who's able to be in the delivery room or not. But for the most part, we, at least with our cases, we've had very many opportunities for the intended parents to actually be in the delivery room, especially as things have been settling down and people are getting vaccinated. And so it's strongly encouraged, and the gestational carriers always, almost always, as far as I know, want you in the delivery room or at least nearby, and want you to be the first to hold the baby and bond with your baby. So therefore, intended parents, you care for your baby from birth, you transfer them to your health insurance, and you usually, before, if your state requires a post-birth hearing, you'll still be able to take your baby home, and then either attend that hearing in person, or over video conferencing. So again, at the hearing, if it's not a pre-birth order, a judge will award the official legal parentage in court, depending on the state. And the attorney will help you with questions about this too, but birth certificates, that's what people have a lot of questions about, that are issued with parents' names, with the intended parents' names, so that you don't have to, have any worry about, how that looks, depending on the state you're in. So afterwards, how the relationship goes usually between intended parents and their gestational carrier happens organically. It depends on what their relationship was during the entire journey. And a lot of times I would say that they do share updates with each other over time. Sometimes the intended parents want their children to know their birth story, and sometimes they don't. It's just completely up to everybody involved. And the most typical situation is carriers just, liking to receive periodic updates now and then, to see how their surrogate baby is doing. So that's kind of how the birth, the time around birth and the time after birth goes in these situations. This I'm only going to talk about for a minute. This is probably the questions that most of you have and that most everybody has revolve around costs. This is our cost matrix, showing the low end, mid-range, and high end based on your circumstances, whether or not you need an egg donor or a sperm donor. If you're using a clinic, and the clinic program fees are included in this, on a wide, there's a very wide a variety of costs associated with that, again, depending on what you need and what types of treatment you need or your surrogate needs. The base fee and the other ensuing fees for the carrier. In the Midwest, I will tell you, like, if you look at this and you say that seems less than what I'm used to, carriers tend to ask for less than they do on the coasts. So if we're in California or on the East Coast, but that's all related to demographics. So it's just, it depends. It really does depend on demographics and where you are, and just kind of where you're looking and what your expectations are for the kinds of fees your surrogate is going to ask for. It also includes miscellaneous fees. There can be those. Insurance can be, obviously, if she has good insurance, that's what everybody wants. But there are cases in which you have to secure alternate plans or enter an agreement to get her a second plan, usually through the ACA during open enrollment. So as you can see by looking at this, it's daunting. But I've gone over it over the last number of years, and tends to reflect, at least where our agency is located in the Midwest, what these fees represent. So if anyone has any specific questions on this, I would definitely encourage you to visit our booth or just connect with me or with Julie after this presentation, and we'd be happy to speak with you personally about it. There's probably a lot of different specific questions that you have when it comes down to overall costs. So finally, just to wrap it all up, it's always important to do your research and find out which clinics and agencies you feel most comfortable with, which is why we encourage people, when you're doing your research on clinics and agencies, to interview a couple of them, or 2 or 3 of them, maybe more if you feel like you have the time or wherewithal. Definitely don't be afraid to ask questions. It's and there's no stupid questions in this. People sometimes say, oh, I'm sorry I have to ask this, but that's what we're here for, and that's what these professionals are here for, is to help you embark on your personal family building journey. So I would definitely ask whichever agency or clinic or whoever you're going to be working with for a free consultation, just to cover your initial questions. Sometimes that might require that you need to meet with a financial planner or find some other funding resources in order to, having looked at the previous slide, to see where you can figure out the more affordable options for moving forward. Obviously, it's not an inexpensive endeavor. There's a lot of different costs associated with it, which is why it can get very complicated. And we are happy to answer any of those questions at any time as well. I would also encourage you to find or talk to people who've been through the process, whether they be other intended parents that you might know, or gestational carriers themselves. And oftentimes you can find groups, or you can find word of mouth, or maybe the agency that you are working with or that you are hoping you may work with would be able to give you a referral to somebody who's worked with them. And you can talk with that person or those people about their journey and what it was like for them. So I definitely encourage that. And then finally, just to leave it all, just kind of put it all in a big package with a big bow, remember that obviously not every situation, especially with pregnancy and childbirth, is ideal. And there can be bumps in the road. But especially when you work with an agency and you have those advocates there for you, you can prepare for them and you can learn from them, and you can have options for how we can help you move on to the next phase and the next stage. So that's overall what these agencies are here for, is to just give you that ease of your, of working through your surrogacy journey, and then ultimately to achieve your dream of parenthood. And that's why we all do this work. And we just want to help you on that journey and through that process. So
thanks so much.
So that is.
I'm sorry, let me cut you off. I see one question in the chat box, but because we've run out of time, I'm going to ask, unless you can answer it very quickly, that they go to your.
I can, yeah.
Okay, if you can answer it. So they want to know, how can a gestational carrier be added as a dependent on insurance?
They actually cannot. You can't add a gestational carrier on your insurance as a dependent. The only time that your insurance is involved, unless your insurance covers a carrier specifically, which does happen sometimes. I know there's a couple organizations out there where that happens. It's always her insurance that is used throughout the process. And the only time your insurance as IPs is going to be involved is when you, like I said, unless they cover the carrier, is when you add your newborn to your insurance after birth.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
I think that was Lauren.
I'll just take that as a yes.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, again,
she says thank you. She says thank you.
Reach out to us. Yep.
So if you have any additional questions, I'm so sorry we weren't able to take any more questions, but the good thing is the Surrogacy Center has a virtual booth and you can go to that booth and ask any questions, and all their contact information is also there so you can reach them directly. So I want to thank Claire.
Yep, and
I
I'll
want to thank
put
Julie.
this presentation up there.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'll put this the PowerPoint presentation, I'll put it up there too so people can look at it themselves if they want to.
Perfect, perfect. Very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.